This project isn't really about just preservation. Preservation, we cannot, in Western Europe, we cannot preserve all of the landscape. We have all the pressures of development and climate change and so on, things we need to manage, growing crops, the economic benefit of those landscape. So preservation may be an element of that, in that we might want to preserve certain elements of the landscape, but a lot of it's more about management rather than preservation. It's more about the choices we make in how we manage that. Landscapes change and have changed all the time, and that's something that archaeology can contribute, and what we're trying to do in the last few weeks here is explain to people how, through understanding the paleo environment, we can see how humans have changed those landscapes for millennia.
Hi, I'm Rich. I'm a volunteer for the Gloucestershire Wildlife Trust. I've been working here for about 2 years.
I'm Jane, Richard's wife, and again, we've been volunteering here for about 2 years.
Yeah, I was just expecting to be able to pick up a piece of pottery and say, you know, that's an Iron Age piece of pottery, but because we've had an opportunity to be able to understand what we're trying to do with regards to what the landscape used to look like and how it's evolved and developed over the years, it's just been absolutely wonderful, and we've learnt such a lot.
I must admit, from my perspective, I thought, 3 days and looking at soil samples, it's going to be so tedious and monotonous, but it's been far from that. We've learnt so much about going down to different depths and what the stories can tell, and we didn't expect the snail to be so important to archaeology, really, did we?
Yeah.
It really sort of hit home. I've always known this, but it sort of hit home that this project is manifestly not looking at the archaeology, and that's what makes it really special. For example, the site that we're on today is a place called Greystones Farm, and Greystones Farm is on the site of a place called Salmonsbury Camp, which officially I think is known as an Iron Age fortified enclosure, but it's one of these sort of oppidum type sites. Because it is recognised and it is a listed site, actually doing archaeological work there is discouraged. So they turn that into a virtue in this project by looking at the landscape around it specifically. So none of the areas that we were digging test pits today, or that people were doing augering today, actually had any archaeology. Instead, they were looking for signs of alluvial material, so floodplains, this kind of thing, old grains and seeds from the past, trying to understand how the landscape developed around the oppidum. It's late in the day and I'm very hot.
Since coming on this period, looking at archaeology at Greystones Farm, I think my ideas about archaeology have been changed quite a bit. I think I look back to when I was a kid, and it was all to do with Carter finding Tutankhamun's tomb, and this weekend I see that looking at the land and the landscape and how man has affected landscape over thousands of years, it is as important as Tutankhamun's mask.
No, if you do that, your back is bending much too much. Okay. So you're better going on the end, this side here, bending your knees like this, and lifting, keeping your back
because of the...
Yeah, keeping your back vertical and up, and there we go, and it's out.
So the Gloucestershire Wildlife Trust want to manage Greystones Farm, which they own, in a responsible way. And for that to take place, they need to understand what's going on underneath the soil. They need to understand the heritage. They also need to understand how what happened in the past has affected the soils here. So the heritage needs to be managed, but that also gives them lessons in terms of their contemporary land use. So both for farming, there's an organic dairy farm. Also, it's a triple SI, so in terms of managing wildlife, and also this is a really important community centre for doing education and outreach and learning, wellness. So all of the messages from the Refit project can feed back into what Gloucestershire Wildlife Trust is doing here. But also they have to consider things from dare we say it, the Brexit perspective. So currently they get funding to manage this landscape in a certain way through countryside stewardship. Now after Brexit there may be different ideas about how landscape should be managed and how funding for that comes through. So perhaps the work that we are doing here can help us think about ways in which we can bring together the interests of farming and the way that that affects the land and the soils with the interests of wildlife and species, as well as the heritage that's under the ground that we might not see every day, but all of which goes to make up and have an impact on the wider landscape and the community living here.
You know the plan, the kind of emergency plan. Sorry, can I just, excuse me, sorry. No, it's all right, I just don't want to. I think when you're aware of, when you have a major consideration like the archaeology, then it does impact on the way you would go about things. You don't have the same free rein, but you try and utilise what you already have. As an existing farm, you know, these things are laid out, and whilst it might not be as easy to just change something automatically, it needs a bit of consideration. You might have to wait and, for example, pass your reasoning through the monument inspector or something like that. Building development, for example, has to be considered. Greater time and money has to be put into sort of getting doing surveys and preliminary work before you start, but it doesn't necessarily stop anything. And the way that we manage the farm ultimately hasn't changed through time, for example, because it historically was a dairy farm, and that's what it is today. So the general layout of the fields as we inherited the farm. It does take some thinking. I mean, we're not just thinking about the archaeology, we're thinking about the needs of the farming and also the wildlife. So whenever a management decision is made, those are the main factors you have to consider, and you have to at some point either not do something, or you have to compromise on an element. That means thinking and making a considered decision, but it doesn't necessarily stop or detract from any of those elements.
So tomorrow we are going to be inviting the public to Greystones to try and engage with our landscape message. So as well as doing things that they might expect, like making Iron Age pots, learning about Iron Age cooking, doing wattle and daub, they are going to be engaging with the wider landscape by having a go at augering. So we'll be trying to put the history and the traditional way that people think about archaeology as a site, so about Salmonsbury, into the wider landscape.
I've been on the pottery. We've been helping make very early Iron Age pottery with, it's just a pinch pot technique, so you roll it into a ball, put your thumb in the middle, twist it around, get it into a nice shape, smooth it out, and then show the different decorations they can do and get the kids to join in. They learn a lot about history in general. Lots of people don't know this site exists, so when they come down here it's learning about people that were living here at this very point where they are, and Iron Age is so far away in comparison to what people learn in their history classes. It's a whole new history that they're learning, and it's very different, very exciting, and kids love it. They're like getting hands-on and dirty, and it's nice. It's very practical learning.
Would you trust that wall?
What, that particular one that they're making now? I would say perhaps the bit that they did this morning, but now they no longer have the sand, and I think the kids are kind of just putting it on a bit randomly, not quite filling the gaps. They're doing the stew. Is it a stew? Yes. Yeah, so it's lots of like rice and barley and peas and celery, I think.
Leek.
Is it leek?
Yeah.
Yeah, and you put it all together and you boil it for a long time, and basically you make this Iron Age stew, which is what they could have made at the time. Very similar things. Obviously, they wouldn't have got it from the grocery, but.
I think it's a really useful way of demonstrating to people today how people lived 2,000 years ago. It's taken me by surprise how close this is to there. It's surprisingly tranquil here, given how chaotic it is on board on the water this morning, today. Just watch the flour milling demonstration, and making a loaf of bread would have been hard work. My children would not be leaving crusts if I'd been making bread 2,000 years ago. They'd have been eating every last bit of it.
And have a look at the sediments around here. So beneath your feet, normally everywhere else in southern England, in the Cotswolds, in the Sussex Downs, your soil is about 30 centimetres deep. And we quake out a plug of the soil beneath my feet. Here we go. Whoopie-doo, there is a piece of the soil down. And you've got to push down hard. No, harder than that. I'm going to be here all day. I think I can get my bed out. Come on. A bit harder than that.
So I think it's really good actually. So we've just come for the day today, and we've got two young children, a 5 and a 3-year-old, and it's nice to kind of have an opportunity to do something that is educational for them to, you know, learn something whilst, you know, there's lots of things to do where you pay loads of money, you know, and they're running around and not taking a lot of interest. So it's nice that there's people around that they can ask questions to and learn whilst they're doing activities. So I think it's really good, and yeah, it's been good.
So this ties into our wider research aims through the Refit project, which is a European project looking at how landscapes are managed. And a large part of that project is all to do with perceptions. And part of those perceptions are the ways that we understand archaeology. And archaeologists, as well as the public, are very guilty of seeing archaeology as being about things and about sites. So for example, archaeology is castles, archaeology is hill forts, archaeology is long barrows. We don't think about how those particular features, which are obvious and easier to excavate, fit into everything that's going on around them. And without those landscapes, in fact, and knowing about the farming and the land use and trees being cut down, those sites actually don't really mean very much and don't tell us very much. So the Refit project is really trying to engage with that message and spread that message here, looking at it at Salmonsbury, Greystones Farm, but also in Badgington in the Cotswolds, sites in France and sites in Spain.
I think both Mike and James that we've been working with over the last couple of days, that they take the time to be able to explain things to you, to explain the rationale and the process associated with it. So you're talking about time team, so instead of just watching that on the telly, we understand a little bit more about, you know, it's not just about digging a hole, it's the research that goes into it, and certainly from a soil sampling perspective, you know, we've done the easy bit, and it's over to Mike now to be able to do all the do all the hard work and all the analysing.
Because I think if you watch an archaeology programme, it's so edited because they've got to fit so much into a, you know, maybe an hour or whatever. So you do miss a lot of it, and we didn't realise that so much went into telling that whole story and what goes on in the background, really.
Okay, cool.
Really looking forward to seeing what Mike discovers when he starts his analysis. Can't wait for that.
Yeah, I think we'll have to wait a little while.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Because we've always wondered what's beneath. That's one of the reasons why we wanted to do this, because we can work above the surface of Greystones, but to learn what's actually going on underneath. And we've learnt a few things, that there's some habitats by where we live in, and the different mounds. We thought, what could they be? But now we know what they are, sort of how the land's been farmed. So that's answered a few questions. So yeah, I don't think we'll be able to switch this off. Do you?
No. And I think the fascination for me is that you know, we stand on the rampart over there, and I think when someone was standing here 3,000 years ago, what did they see? What's the difference in the landscape? But after what we've done here over this weekend and the research that you guys have done, we'll start to know, and someone can tell us. You know, Mike was already talking about potentially that there's alders and woodland around there, so it'll be just nice to be able to know what that view was.
Definitely.
I think being here at Greystones, where everything is to do with the land, whether it's the past or the present, whether it's about farming, whether it's about the wildlife here, I think it's all interconnected, and we should be thinking more about all those aspects, not just one. So maybe in the future farming will have to change, maybe people's attitudes to the countryside will have to change as well.